I followed the advice of the Centers for Disease Control and got a vaccination, which may or may not have lessened my symptoms. But then I discovered I had neglected the most important prophylaxis of all, prayer. This advice came from the evangelist Gloria Copeland, who with her husband, Kenneth, runs a religious empire based largely on faith healing. Copeland posted a video last week that argued, passionately if incoherently, either that the flu doesn't actually exist, we got a duck season, a deer season, but we don't have a flu season, or that faith can protect you from it, inoculate yourself with the Word of God. That disclaimer would be more convincing if there weren't copious evidence that Copeland actually does not value medicine, at least in comparison with the kind of healing that goes on in her church and at revivals. Her statement on the website was followed by pages of testimonials like this one, from Terry. Tests showed I had a growth on my gallbladder and the doctor recommended surgery. We prayed and received healing by faith. Hands were laid on me and I never had another symptom. As Copeland once preached, we know what's wrong with you. You've got cancer. The bad news is we don't know what to do about it except give you some poison that will make you sicker. Now, which do you want to do? Do you want to do that, or do you want to sit in here on a Saturday morning, hear the Word of God and let faith come into your heart and be healed? Such as the flu. Anderson notes that this is not a practice confined to right-wing Christians. Seeking to cure cancer by praying is not more or less implausible than using crystals for the purpose. Oprah, that great font of national gullibility, was an early exponent of The Secret, a best-selling book by Rhonda Burns that repackaged prosperity gospel in secular form as the law of attraction, the idea that the universe would provide whatever you sought if you just thought about it long and hard enough. Morally, this is deplorable. Burns' book never so much as raised the possibility that the awesome power she had discovered could be used for the benefit of anyone else, a hungry child, say, rather than grabbing jewelry, toys, lovers, or a good parking spot. It's also common knowledge that the prosperity in prosperity gospel mostly accrues to the people who preach it. Still, between coughing fits last week, I wondered, could Copeland be onto something? I had relied on medical science to ward off the flu, and I got sick anyway. Full disclosure, this is a self-diagnosis, based on my feeling the way Trump reportedly described the nations of Africa. What does science have to say about prayer as a form of medical prophylaxis? It is part of the greatness of the scientific method that this question can be asked, and, within the limits of our present-day knowledge, answered. The first statistical study of so-called intercessory prayer was published in 1872 by the eminent Victorian scientist Sir Francis Galton, who noted that, notwithstanding the millions of prayers regularly offered in European countries for the health of their respective royal families, on average royals actually died younger 64 years than clergymen, lawyers, military officers, or members of all other genteel professions, excluding deaths by accident or violence. I rest my case. No, actually, I don't, because scientists have continued to study the question not by calculating the lifespan of kings, but with controlled experiments enlisting hundreds of subjects and modern statistical analysis. You can read an analysis by David R. Hodge of Arizona State University here, and another here. What seemed to Galton like a straightforward question of statistics turns out to pose all kinds of research conundrums. What kinds of prayer should be studied, and by whom? For what kinds of disease? Should the people prayed for be told in advance, and is there informed consent required? What measures should be used to determine if the prayers worked? Each researcher answered those questions differently. A few studies, less than half, indicated a beneficial effect of intercessory prayer, but the effects were small. Often the outcomes involved obscure markers of recovery, such as the incidence of certain specific surgical complications. God works in mysterious ways, but that's a long way from being raised from the dead. Still, there's no harm in it, is there? When people are sick, their families and friends want to feel they're doing something, and praying for them, if nothing else, keeps them in mind. Last month, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders asked people to pray for 9-year-old Sophia Marie Campa-Peters, who was about to undergo life-saving brain surgery. Those who responded undoubtedly felt good about themselves. Sophia and her parents took courage from the response, and Trump himself, at the National Prayer Breakfast last week, cited her recovery after millions of people lifted Sophia up in their prayers. Who could be against that, given, of course, that the prayers were viewed, properly, as supplemental to the surgery, rather than a substitute for it? But that's the catch: some people do substitute faith for medical treatment. The Copeland's own church was at the center of a measles outbreak in 2013, spread by children whose parents had failed to vaccinate them. The church denied that it discourages vaccination, but as one former member explained, to get a vaccine would have been viewed by me and my friends and my peers as an act of fear that you doubted God would keep you safe. We simply didn't do it. James Inhofe, the chair of the Senate Environmental Committee, has been especially forceful in this regard. His view is to let God handle global warming, since it's out of humanity's hands anyway. God's still up there, he has said. The arrogance of people to think that we, human beings, would be able to change what he is doing in the climate is to me outrageous. All I can say about that is, for Inhofe's sake, I hope he doesn't take the same attitude toward his own health as he does toward the health of the earth.